The roar of the crowd had barely settled when the lights dimmed, casting the arena in a momentary hush that felt like the calm before a storm. It wasn't just another fight night. Something was different this time. You could sense it. A collision course had been set between two warriors from opposite ends of the MMA spectrum, and the atmosphere pulsed with a kind of electricity you can't fake. On one end stood Alexander Volkanovski, the battle-hardened tactician, a man who had carved his name into UFC folklore through precision, heart, and an unbreakable will. On the other, Diego Lopes, the unpredictable storm, a rising force who had turned heads with his fearless style and a hunger that couldn't be taught. This wasn't just about rankings or records. No, this fight was personal in a way that transcended numbers. Volkanovski had spent years at the summit, defending his legacy with a surgeon's focus and the heart of a warrior. He wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fending off time, doubt, and a wave of hungry contenders clawing at his throne. Every round, every exchange, had become a statement. I'm still here. But then came Diego Lopes, a fighter who didn't just want to win. He wanted to take something. He didn't arrive in the UFC with the fanfare of a golden boy, but rather with grit, scars, and a style that felt more like jazz than structured combat. It was raw, unpredictable, dangerous. The matchup had fans and pundits alike buzzing, not just for what it meant technically, but for what it meant symbolically. Volkanovski represented the old guard, not in age, but in principle. Discipline, strategy, composure under fire. Lopes was chaos incarnate, the kind of fighter who thrives in messiness, who makes you fight his fight, whether you like it or not. Their styles couldn't be more different, and yet, in the chaos of combat, they would be forced to meet in the middle. And that middle, that's where legends are either made or dismantled. Weeks leading up to the fight, the narrative swirled. Could Volkanovski bounce back from recent wars that had tested his limits, physically and emotionally? Would Lopes finally break through and take his place among the elite? Every media appearance, every training clip, every leaked sparring rumor added more fuel to the fire. But beneath the trash talk, behind the gloves and bravado, something deeper was simmering, something primal. Two men on a crash course, each with everything to gain, and just as much to lose. In the gym, Volkanovski looked sharp, sharper than ever, some said. But there was a weight in his eyes, the kind only a man who's seen too many 5-round wars can carry. He knew this wasn't just another test. This was the kind of fight that defines eras. Not just for him, but for the division, for the fans, and for what it means to truly come back from the brink. Diego, on the other hand, trained like a man possessed. He wasn't interested in respecting legends. Respect to him was earned inside that cage, not outside of it. And if he had to bloody a few icons to get it, so be it. It wasn't about style points. It wasn't about being the crowd favorite. This fight was about taking the soul of the other man. And both fighters knew it. That's what made the stakes feel so high. The octagon, for one night, would become more than a cage. It would become a reckoning. Fight night arrived with an eerie tension. Fans poured into the arena, some chanting Volkanovski's name like a prayer, others rallying behind Lopes like he was the future of the sport. The anticipation was unbearable. There was no belt on the line, but in many ways, this felt bigger than gold. It was about legacy. It was about survival. It was about who could impose their truth on the other before the final horn. As the lights narrowed into a single spotlight and the announcer's voice echoed through the arena, time seemed to slow. Volkanovski stepped forward, chin up, gloves raised, every movement measured. Lopes followed, bouncing on his toes, eyes locked in, not with respect, but with something closer to hunger. No touch of gloves, no nod of acknowledgement, just silence. The kind of silence that only comes when two men are about to trade parts of themselves they can never get back. The bell rang. Volkanovski started like a man trying to write the ending of a story everyone else thought had already closed. Sharp jabs, calculated footwork, the rhythm of a fighter who had been here too many times to panic. But Lopes? He didn't follow the script. He tore it up, spinning back fists from impossible angles, wild hooks that seemed to defy logic. But somehow, someway, they kept landing. The crowd couldn't decide whether to gasp or cheer. It wasn't just a fight. It was a storm. Every exchange felt like a gamble with fate. Volkanovski's technique against Lopes' chaos. Moments where Volkanovski would land the crisp combination, only to get caught seconds later with something no one saw coming. They were both bleeding, both breathing heavy, but neither would step back. Seconds ticked away, but the sense of finality never came. Instead, with each round, the intensity deepened. This wasn't heading toward a decision. Something was about to break. A chin, a will, a career. And just as the fourth round came to a close, Lopes slipped a punch and landed an uppercut so clean it sounded like a firecracker. Volkanovski staggered. Just for a second. Just enough. But that's where it paused. That's where it froze, in the minds of every fan watching. Breath held, heart pounding, waiting to see if the legend would fall, or rise one more time. Volkanovski's knees bent slightly as the uppercut rippled through him. And, for a breathless moment, it looked like the veteran might crumble. The crowd collectively leaned forward, unsure if they were about to witness a passing of the torch or a moment of legendary resilience. But before Lopes could swarm, Volkanovski circled out, pawing at the air to buy time. His instincts kicking in like a machine built for survival. It wasn't clean. It wasn't perfect. But it was enough. The kind of split-second decision that only comes from years of being hunted inside that unforgiving cage. Lopes didn't hesitate. He smelled blood. He pressed forward, unloading with a level of aggression that felt almost reckless, but somehow still controlled. Elbows in the clinch, knees up the middle, looping shots that seemed to come from nowhere. Volkanovski absorbed what he could, rolled with the rest, and countered with short, sharp punches that snapped with intention. The tide was shifting, but not in a straight line. It was chaos disguised as rhythm, and both fighters were struggling to stay one step ahead. For the first time, it felt like even the commentators had run out of cliches. They weren't just describing a fight anymore. They were witnessing something they couldn't quite categorize. Between rounds, the camera cut to Lopes' corner, and the energy there was manic. Coaches shouting over each other, trying to bottle lightning and give it structure. Meanwhile, Volkanovski's corner worked in near silence, patching up a cut, icing his shoulder, giving short, direct commands. It was experience versus hunger, structure versus fire. But just as the fifth round was about to begin, something unexpected shifted the energy in the entire building. An official walked toward Volkanovski's corner, whispering something into the head coach's ear. Confusion flickered across their faces. The ref paused the round for a moment longer than usual. No announcement. No explanation. Just a delay that made the audience restless. And then, with no further warning, the round began. But the delay had done something. Something strange. Volkanovski's rhythm was off, his footwork suddenly more hesitant. Lopes, sensing the shift, tilted his head curiously before pressing forward once again. Within seconds, Lopes landed another hard shot, and this time, Volkanovski didn't move. He stood his ground, not with defiance, but with stillness. A moment that felt out of character. He absorbed the flurry, stepped back, and then, without warning, he dropped levels and shot for a takedown. It wasn't part of his usual game plan. The crowd roared, not because of the takedown itself, but because of what it meant. Volkanovski was adjusting on the fly. A veteran move, sure, but also a sign that he was being pushed past his normal playbook. Lopes hit the canvas, but he didn't panic. Instead, he locked up his legs, threatened with a triangle, then transitioned to a slick armbar setup that had fans screaming before it was even fully locked in. Volkanovski twisted out, barely escaping. But now both men were bleeding, breathing through their mouths, and locked in a kind of primal chess match that stripped away any trace of composure. And then came the twist no one expected. Mid-scramble, Lopes suddenly paused, not in pain, not in exhaustion, but as if something was wrong. His face twisted, not from a strike, but from confusion. Volkanovski saw it too, hesitating for a half-beat, then resetting his position. The referee stepped in to separate them, and both men backed off, unsure of what was happening. The crowd murmured, sensing something off. Medical staff were called to the edge of the cage. But Lopes waved them off, nodding that he could continue. He didn't say what he felt, didn't explain the momentary glitch in his flow, but the edge was gone. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Volkanovski, on the other hand, sensed the shift, like a predator. He didn't press too hard. He was too smart for that. Instead, he began probing, testing, mixing up his strikes in ways that forced Lopes to react, to move, to think. Whatever momentary issue had hit Lopes, it had planted a seed of doubt, and doubt, in a fight this intense, was as deadly as a clean punch. The audience could feel the story changing again. What had started as a war between styles had now become something deeper. A mental game layered over the physical. One man trying to shake off the unknown, the other trying to turn a flicker of weakness into a wildfire. The fifth round was still underway, but it felt like something else was creeping into the cage, something that neither corner had prepared for. And just when it seemed like things might return to form, Volkanovski feinted a jab and launched a spinning elbow that grazed Lopes across the temple, snapping his head sideways. It wasn't a knockout shot, but it was clean. Too clean. Lopes stumbled, not dramatically, but just enough to let the entire arena know something had changed. Volkanovski didn't chase. He waited, calculated. He wanted Lopes to make the next move. The clock ticked down. The horn sounded. But the moment didn't fade. In both corners, the atmosphere was electric, but different. Lopes' team whispered more than they spoke now, concern written across their faces. Volkanovski sat quietly, staring across the cage, not celebrating, not smiling, just watching, waiting. And in that space between rounds, where strategy ends and instinct begins, a new layer of tension began to form, something no one had predicted, something even the fighters hadn't seen coming. When the sixth round began, a rarity reserved only for fights where circumstances demand continuation, there was no announcement, no dramatic build-up, just two fighters rising from their stools as if instinct alone carried them. The crowd was on its feet, buzzing with confusion and awe. A backstage miscommunication had extended the bout under a special clause tied to a last-minute rule adjustment, a clause both corners had been quietly informed of during that strange pause in the fifth. It wasn't normal. It wasn't planned, but somehow it was happening. Diego Lopes, still shaking off whatever had rattled him earlier, stood tall, defiant, but his movements had changed. Slight delay in his reactions, a stiffness in his posture. Volkanovski noticed it immediately, and while he didn't rush in recklessly, there was a certain gravity to the way he closed distance, a sense that he was ready to end this. Each jab now carried weight. Each feint drew bigger reactions. Lopes, who had started this war with unpredictable flair and endless energy, was now relying on pure grit to stay upright. But even so, there was no quit in his eyes. Then, in a flash of movement, Lopes rolled under a right hook and countered with a tight left that clipped Volkanovski's jaw clean. The veteran stumbled back, caught himself on the cage, and nodded. Not in pain, but in recognition. As if to say, "You're still here." That's when the momentum shifted again. Lopes, digging deep, began to pour out everything he had left. Combinations that ignored his own fatigue, knees in the clinch that stung with every lift, and elbows that reminded the crowd why he'd become the wild card of the division. But Volkanovski refused to fall. Every strike he absorbed became fuel. Every missed shot by Lopes opened a new window. And when the final minute approached, it was Volkanovski who suddenly surged forward. A sharp leg kick. A jab to the body. Then a crushing right hand that sent Lopes stumbling backward, nearly folding against the fence. The referee stepped closer. Lopes fired back wildly, but missed. Another body shot, another right hand, and then Volkanovski did something no one expected. He stepped back. He looked at Lopes, really looked at him. A moment passed where he could have ended it, could have unleashed one final barrage, and forced the stoppage. But he didn't. He let the final seconds tick away, letting the crowd erupt into a storm of sound and disbelief. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't ego. It was something deeper. Respect forged through fire. When the horn sounded, both men collapsed into their corners, not out of defeat, but sheer exhaustion. Neither had been finished, but both had gone somewhere few fighters ever reach. The judges conferred. The arena held its breath. Then came the announcement, split decision. And when Volkanovski's name was called, the reaction was thunderous, but strangely muted by awe. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't leap onto the cage. He just nodded, as if he'd known all along how much it would cost to survive this night. Lopes, on the other hand, stood still for a long moment before turning to shake Volkanovski's hand. No words exchanged, no false smiles, just a silent mutual acknowledgement that they had taken each other to the edge of everything. As they walked out of the octagon, the final twist hit backstage. Cameras caught Lopes wincing, favoring his side. Medical teams swarmed, eventually revealing he had fought through the final round, and the latter half of the fifth, with a microfracture in his rib. It explained the brief pause, the hesitation, the shift in energy. But even more shocking was the follow-up scan that revealed a minor nerve compression from a freight contortion in one of the early grappling scrambles, something that temporarily affected his balance and coordination. He never told his corner, never asked for a timeout. He just kept fighting. And that, more than any scorecard or headline, became the story. Alexander Volkanovski had won the battle, but Diego Lopes had proven he belonged in the conversation with the best in the world, not just as a wild striker or a hype train, but as a fighter with the heart to endure the worst and keep throwing until the final horn. In the weeks that followed, fans didn't argue over who won. They talked about what they witnessed: a modern war, crafted not by trash talk or media hype, but by raw ability, unshakable spirit, and the kind of moments that remind people why they fell in love with the sport in the first place. Long after the arena lights dimmed and the blood dried from the mat, one question lingered in the minds of those who watched. If that was just the beginning of Lopes' story, what will the end look like?